So in this video, we're talking about simplifying complex fractions. Now, a complex fraction is just a quotient having a fraction in the numerator, denominator, or both. If the complex fraction has a variable in it, it's technically called a complex rational expression. So here are some examples of complex fractions. So this one you can see is just numbers only, and then we have a fraction with a variable in the numerator and just a regular number in the denominator. Here we have variables on both numerator and denominator, and same thing here. Now, I want to point out that complex in this case, in complex fractions, means just that it's like multifaceted or like difficult. It doesn't imply any connection to complex numbers that we covered in the quadratic section, where you have a number containing I, right? So that it has some sort of imaginary component to it. Now, what I want you to be careful with complex fractions is that there's a numerator that is a fraction. There's a denominator that is a fraction. And then you have a main fraction bar. So it's almost like a fraction over another fraction at the bottom. Okay? So this would be considered the numerator, and then this would be the denominator. Now notice that here in the numerator you have one fraction consolidated together, versus the denominator you have two fractions. So that's important later on. So when we're simplifying complex numbers, basically what you want to do is rewrite it as a division problem, right? Because a fraction is really just dividing, right? Like if I have 2 over 8, that means 2 divided by 8, right? If I have 10 over 5, that means 10 divided by 5. So really a fraction bar is just division. So this is the process that we're going to go through. We're going to simplify the numerator and denominator separately. Now, the important thing here is that to make sure that you have one fraction together, okay? A single fraction. Then you want to divide by multiplying the numerator by the reciprocal of the denominator. So basically, dividing a number is the same thing as multiplying the reciprocal. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to divide by multiplying the reciprocal. And then you just simplify. So in other words, you can look at this problem right here. This is the divided part, right? As the numerator fraction, y plus 2 over y, being divided by the denominator, which is the fraction y minus 2 over 3y. So basically here, we're going to simplify this numerator. Now, this doesn't factor at all, so you can't simplify it. Simplify the denominator. Again, this doesn't factor at all, where you can cancel out common factors on top and bottom, so you can't simplify it. And it's already one single fraction. So now we can move on to step 2. Step 2 is you divide by multiplying the reciprocal. So I'm going to multiply 3y over y minus 2. Now, I have to now go ahead and simplify this. Remember that multiplying fractions, right? Top times top over bottom times bottom. So really, it's already one fraction. We just have to simplify. Y would cancel out with y. So we end up with 3 times y plus 2, which would be 3y plus 6, over the denominator y minus 2. And of course, there is variables in the denominator, so we have to state that y cannot equal 0, and it cannot equal 2. All right, let's try another one. So Here we have the same situation. We have numerator divided by denominator, right? So I'm going to go in and I'm going to simplify the numerator, because right now, not like over here, this was one whole fraction already together. This is two separate terms. So I need to combine those two so that I can get one single fraction in the numerator, and doing the same thing, one single fraction in the denominator. So 4 is technically 4 over 1, so I'm going to multiply x on top and bottom. So now I have 4x over x minus 6 over x. So that will be 4x minus 6 all over, the denominator stays the same, x. And this is being divided by, now I need to do the same thing here, 2 over 1. So again, the denominators to be the same, I'll just multiply x on top and bottom. So I have 2x over x minus 3 over x. 2x minus 3 would just be 2x minus 3. And then the denominator of x stays the same. So now I'm going to move on to step 2. Now that I have one single fraction in the numerator over one single fraction in the denominator, I'm going to go ahead and divide by taking the first fraction, the numerator, and multiplying it by the reciprocal of the denominator. Okay, now I can go in, multiply top times top, over, all over, bottom times bottom, right? Now, this will cancel out, the x will cancel out, x divided by x will cancel, and that's about it. So my final answer would be 4. I could factor out a 2 from 4x minus 6, but I can't factor out a 2 here, so I can't cancel out a 2, so that wouldn't be helpful. So my final answer is just 4x minus 6 over 2x minus 3, where x cannot equal. Again, you want to make sure that you find your excluded values before you canceled out things. So x cannot equal 0 and x cannot be 3 over 2. Okay. Let's do one last one, and then I have a few for you to try on your own. On number 3, we have a numerator over a denominator. All right, there's a lot going on here. In order to combine these two, I will need to make these two denominators the same. Now, right now, one is w plus 3 and the other one is w minus 3. So I'm going to multiply the second fraction by w plus 3. And I'm going to multiply the first fraction by w minus 3. So now the numerator is w minus 3 minus, which I need to put the second thing in parentheses, so this would be minus w minus 3 all over the same denominator of w minus 3 times w plus 3. That's just the numerator. I could clearly also simplify that, but I'm going to do a step at a time. Now moving on to the denominator. 1 is just 1 over 1. So if I wanted to make these two the same, then I need to multiply this first fraction by u squared minus 9. And by u I mean w. W squared minus 9. So I end up with w squared minus 9 plus 9 all over the same denominator of w squared minus 9. Now w squared minus 9 actually does factor, but again, I'm just going to do one step at a time. So moving right along, let's go ahead and simplify the numerator here. W minus w would cancel, and negative 3 minus 3 would be negative 6. The denominator is w plus 3 times w minus 3. For the denominator of the complex fraction, negative 9 plus 9 would cancel, so we have u squared over u squared minus 9, which would factor, that's the difference of squares, so we'll factor into w plus 3 times w minus 3. And then now I'm going to rewrite this as numerator and then times reciprocal denominator. So w plus 3 times w minus 3 over w squared. So now we just are multiplying top times top over bottom times bottom. So we can end up canceling out w plus 3 and w minus 3. So our final answer would be -6 over u squared, where w cannot equal -3, +3, or 0. All right, so go ahead and pause this video now and try these 3 on your own. Okay, so let's start with number 1. Number 1, you have multiple fractions in the numerator and then multiple fractions in the denominator as well. Now the nice thing about the numerator is that the denominator is already x, so we can go ahead and group them already. 4 plus 1 would be 5, and then the denominator of x stays the same. In the denominator, however, we are going to have to change the denominator 1 to be x squared, so we're going to multiply x squared on the top and the bottom. So that gives us 3x squared over x squared. So 3x squared plus 2 would just be 3x squared plus 2. And then the denominator of x squared stays the same. Now we're going to go ahead and actually divide, now that we have one fraction over one fraction. And I'm going to take the numerator and then change the division to multiplying the reciprocal x squared over 3x squared plus 2. Now these two are multiplying together, so that means that it's just 5 times x squared over x times 3x squared plus 2. Now we can cancel out one copy of x here with one copy of x here, leaving only one copy of x in the numerator. So we end up with 5 times x over 3x squared plus 2. And again, of course, we do have to list excluded values. X cannot be 0, and x cannot be 3x squared plus 2 cannot equal 0. Like this entire factor can't equal 0. So that means that x squared cannot equal -2 over 3. And then square root both sides. X cannot be plus, minus, and multiply by the square root of 3 to rationalize the denominator. So x cannot be plus minus I square root of 6 over 3. Oops, I forgot the plus minus. There we go. All right, for number 2, same thing. Now, you might not realize that this denominator is a fraction, right? So let's put it over 1, just so that we can have fraction over fraction. And the numerator is already one fraction, so we can go right into step 2. Dividing any number is the same thing as multiplying the reciprocal of that number, 1 over x plus 1. So again, multiplying these two would just be top times top over bottom times bottom. So we end up with 2x squared plus 2x times 1, which would be 2x squared plus 2x. And the denominator 3 times x plus 1. We can just leave it like that for now. Now I can actually factor the numerator here. I could factor out a 2x, and that gives me x plus 1. And then in the denominator, that would be 3 times x plus 1. So x plus 1 ends up canceling, so our final answer would be 2x over 3. And again, we do have to state that x cannot equal, x plus 1 cannot be 0, so that means that x cannot be -1. Okie dokie. Moving right along, looking at number 3, we have multiple fractions in the numerator and multiple fractions in the denominator. So the first order of business will be to consolidate and actually subtract those two fractions. So I'm going to factor out a 3, which gives me x plus 4, and 9, of course, is 3 times 3. So on the top, I'm missing here a factor of 3. Now we have 3 times 3 on both, but on this fraction, I'm missing x plus 4. So I'll multiply that on top and bottom. Okay, for the denominator, this denominator is just x plus 4, and the other one is just 4. So we're missing the factor of x plus 4 here, and we're missing the factor of 4 here. Okay, let's go ahead and simplify that. The top, 3x minus negative x times x would be negative x squared. Negative x times positive 4 is negative 4x. The denominator is, for the numerator, let me just get rid of the super extended line. The denominator is the same, 3 times 3 times x plus 4. That's the numerator of the numerator fraction. And then for the denominator fraction, we have 4x minus negative x times x is negative x squared. Negative x times 4 is negative 4x. The denominator here will be the same on both, 4 times x plus 4. Okay. Now let's change this division to multiplying the reciprocal. So we have 3. Actually, while I write this out, I'll simplify. 3x minus 4x is negative 1x. And negative x squared, of course, is just negative x squared. And that's over the denominator of 3 times x plus 4. And then we are going to multiply the reciprocal of the denominator, which would be 4 times x plus 4 over negative x squared. And then 4x minus 4x actually cancels. So we can put that negative x squared kind of in the middle there, so it looks good. All right, now we need to cancel out anything that's on top and bottom. Before I go in and start canceling stuff out so that I don't forget, let me go ahead and write my excluded values. So x cannot be 0 and x cannot be negative 4. Okay, now we can cancel out x plus 4 divided by x plus 4 cancels. And then I could factor out a negative x from both of these, which would give me x plus 1. And then I could divide negative x and divide a negative x here, which would give me, get rid of the negative. Negative divided by a negative is a positive, and then get rid of 1 copy of x, which would give me 1 copy of x in the denominator. So in the numerator, we just have x plus 1 times 4, which would be 4x plus 4. And in the denominator, we have 3 times x, which is 9x. All right, so hopefully you got those right. Let's do a little bit more of the more difficult, more involved examples. So let's work on number 1 together. Now, number 1 might seem like a lot because there is a lot going on in the denominator and numerator, but just take it step by step. So first start with the numerator. we need to, because remember, you need to consolidate it one fraction over another fraction. So let's consolidate the numerator, multiply this fraction by 3, and then multiplying this fraction by x plus 7. So we end up with x plus 7 times 1, which will be x plus 7 plus 15. So it's the numerator is x plus 7 plus 15, and the denominator, the fraction denominator will be the same, 3 times x plus 7. Make sure you put any time that you're multiplying to a something that has more than one term, make sure that you are putting it in parentheses, because the multiplication would go to all of the terms, not just one of the terms. And then the denominator, we can actually factor out a 3 here, which will give x plus 7, and 9 is 3 times 3, so we're just missing one more factor of 3 in this fraction, and we're missing a copy of x plus 7 in this fraction. Okay, now here's the tricky part, because we have binomial times binomial, so I'm kind of going to do this in my head if you follow along. X times x would be x squared, and then we have 7x minus 6x would be 1x, and 7 times negative 6 is negative 42. And then we're adding, for the numerator, x minus 6 times 3, which would be 3x minus 18. The denominator of this fraction would just be the 3 times 3 times x plus 7. Okay, so now we have this numerator divided by, that's the main fraction bar, the denominator. So I'm going to change that to multiplying the reciprocal. As I write it down, I'm going to simplify. So x7 plus 15 is 22 over the denominator. And then instead of dividing the number, I'm going to write it as multiplying the reciprocal. So the reciprocal will be 3 times x plus 7. And then the denominator would be x squared. 1x, sorry about that, 1x plus 3x would be 4x. And negative 42 minus 18 is negative 60. Okay. So now we need to go in and cancel out any possible factors that we have in common in the numerator and denominator. However, in order to do that, I will need to factor this guy. So multiplies to negative 60 and adds to 4. We have 2 and 30, no. 4 and 15, no. 5, no. 6 and 10. So negative 6 times 10, negative 6 plus 10. Okay, so this one factors, the coefficient is 1, so it's the easy x minus 6 times x plus 10. And now I could see what factors will go ahead and cancel. I could also now from this point see what my excluded values are. So x cannot equal negative 7, positive 6, or negative 10. Okay, and then from there, the factors that cancel are x plus 7 and 1 copy of 3. Here we have x plus 22, and here we have x minus 6 and x plus 10, so that will not cancel at all. So the numerator will be 3 times x plus 22, which would be 3x plus 66. And then in the denominator, we have the original x minus 6 times x plus 10, which was x squared plus 4x minus 60, because nothing canceled. So that is my final answer. All right, go ahead and pause the video now and try number 2 on your own. Okay, so with this one, again, you want to just focus on consolidating. There are two fractions in the numerator, so you want to consolidate that to one term only, right? There are two terms in the denominator as well. You want to consolidate that only one term. So I'm going to go ahead and change this fraction, right? This fraction is missing the factor of x plus 2, so I'm going to multiply x plus 2 on top and bottom, because I need to make the denominators the same. And then this fraction is missing the factor of x minus 1, which I need to multiply top and bottom. For this fraction, we're missing a factor of 2, so I'll multiply that to top and bottom. And for this fraction, we're missing a factor of x plus 1, minus 1, excuse me. So I'll multiply that to top and bottom. All right, so let's go ahead and simplify the top. 4 times x, it will be 4x. And 4 times negative 1 would be negative 4. And then we're adding to that x plus 2 times x plus 2. So x times x would be x squared. 2x plus 2x would be 4x. And 2 times 2 is 4. The denominator would be the x minus 1 times x plus 2. Okay, moving right along for the bottom, the numerator will be 2 times 4, which is 8. And then let me put the minus there and then put the multiplication of these two in parentheses so I don't mess it up later. So x times x would be x squared. Negative 1x minus 1x would be minus 2x. And negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. Now I can go in and distribute the negative. That way I can make sure that I'm not messing up my sign. So that will be a negative, then this would be a positive, and this would be a negative. It just changes the sign. All right. Oop, and let me get rid of my parentheses over here. All right. Now the denominator is the same, right? 2 times x minus 1. So now I have a fraction over fraction. So I'm going to write it as multiplying reciprocal. So numerator, let me write it down as I simplify it, would be x squared. And then 4x plus 4x is 8x. And negative 4 plus 4 would actually just cancel. So that is the numerator over, and then the bottom of the top fraction will be x minus 1 times x plus 2. And instead of writing it as dividing, right, we're going to multiply the reciprocal. 2 times x minus 1 over, and then negative x squared plus 2x, and 8 minus 1 is 7. Okay. Now we need to go in and factor the whatever remains on the top and the bottom. So this will be just that times top over bottom times bottom. But I need to go ahead and factor this one and factor this one as well. The rest of them are already factored. So I could factor out an x here, which would give me x plus 8, and then times 2 times x minus 1. The denominator, the x minus 1 times x plus 2, is already factored out. I could also, just to make it easier to factor this one, factor out a negative, and then that would give me, if I factor out a negative, it would be x squared minus 2x minus 7. So multiplies to negative 7, adds to 2. One and 7 are the only things that multiply to 7, and that doesn't add to 2, so you can't factor that one. So I just factored out a negative, which means that the fraction will be negative, that's fine, and then that didn't factor any further, so that's x squared minus 2x minus 7. Okay, so we have to write what are the excluded values, right? Now the excluded values, x cannot be positive 1, that one's clear, negative 2, that one's also clear, but this can also not equal 0. So how are we going to find what values would make the 0? We'll have to use the quadratic formula, right? X squared minus 2x minus 7 cannot equal 0. So in order to find those values, we would have to use the quadratic formula. So remember the quadratic formula is negative b plus minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. So in the numerator, negative 2 would be positive 2 plus minus the square root of negative 2 squared is 4 minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 7. That's all going over the denominator of 2 times a. 2 times 1 would just be 2. Let's go ahead and simplify that. Negative 4 times 1 times negative 7 would be positive 28. 4, so this is 4 plus 28 all over 2. And we could distribute the division of 2 to both of the terms. 2 over 2 plus minus square root of 28 plus 4 would be 32 over 2. Now 32 actually will simplify the square root of 32 because 32 is actually 2 times 16. So of course the square root of 16 is just 4, so the square root of 32 simplifies to 4 times the square root of 2. So this will be the square root of 32, I could rewrite that. That's 4 times the square root of 2. Now, 2 over 2 is obviously 1, and then 4 divided by 2 is 2, so we end up with 1 plus minus 2 square root of 2. So those are our excluded values. They were a little bit more involved this time because we had to use the quadratic formula. But that's neither here nor there. Let's go ahead and cancel out any common factors. We have an x minus 1 that we can cancel. And is that it? That is it. So numerator, 2x times x would be 2x squared. 2x times 8 would be 16x. And then in our denominator, we have a negative x. Actually, we could just make the whole fraction negative and not have to worry about that negative. Just move the negative to the whole fraction. And then now we can multiply x plus 2 times x squared minus 2x minus 7. So x times x would be x cubed. X times negative 2x would be negative 2x squared. X times negative 7 would be negative 7x. 2 times x squared would be 2x squared. 2 times negative 2x would be negative 4x. And 2 times negative 7 is negative 14. Let's combine like terms. X cubed, negative x squared minus 2x squared actually cancels. Negative 7x minus 4x will be negative 11x. And negative 14 is just negative 14. Okie dokie. So this is our final simplified form, and these are the excluded values. So I hope that that was helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!